Hi, and welcome to the 7th episode of The Great Debate, a 10-part webinar series where two guests debate whether a cybersecurity topic should be the top priority right now. Before we get to today's debate, a few operational items. First, today's session is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording shortly after the debate wraps up. Next, there are several opportunities for today's guests to cover audience questions. You can add your question using either the chat or the question panel within GoToWebinar. You'll also notice a poll right now asking you whether you're in favor or opposed to this statement. Cloud security posture is the #1 cybersecurity priority right now. We'll tally the results and we'll ask again at the end to see if either of our guests changed your mind about the topic. Finally, we'll be making a $500 donation to each of today's speakers to a charity of their choice. And with that, I'm going to share the poll results and hand it off to Axonius CMO, Nathan Burke, to get started.
Okay, so we're at 63% opposed, 38% in favor. All right, so you guys know what you're up against. So let's see if anything changes at the end. So thank you, Anna, and let's get to it. So today's topic is, should cloud security posture be the #1 priority right now? And our first guest taking the in favor position is Ashish Rajan. He is the head of security for a global tech company, and when not in his 9-to-5, he can be found building a cybersecurity community and mentoring future cybersecurity professionals and leaders. He is a community builder, a cybersecurity content creator, an international speaker. He organizes tech conferences and hosts cybersecurity podcasts and events. He produces and hosts the Cloud Security Podcast with well over 1,000 plus viewers on each live stream, and has pioneered cloud security training programs through the Cloud Security Academy. He is also joining us at 4 a.m., so look at that dedication. So Ashish, please tell our audience about the charity that you're supporting.
Sure, thank you everyone for having me. It's really a great pleasure. I'm supporting, thank you. I was waiting for the slide. I'm supporting Girls Who Code. The reason for this, as I mentioned, I organize a lot of conferences and have been trying to build the community for some time. One of the challenges that I've come across quite a bit has been to, convince girls to come into the space. I guess I've always felt there's almost a gender disparity, for lack of a better word. And I love the work that Girl Who Codes are doing. They're teaching young girls how to code, how to get into the field, how to get into technology without the bias that comes with, oh, it's only a man-only field. So yeah, that's why I'm supporting those folks.
All right, great. Thank you for joining us today. And taking the opposing position on cloud security posture today is David Cass. He serves as the Vice President of Cyber IT Risk within supervision for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He is a proven business leader, change agent, and subject matter expert in cybersecurity, risk, privacy, and resiliency. He's had 15 plus years of senior management experience. Previously, he was the CISO and global partner of cloud security services for IBM, where he had global responsibility for all aspects of cloud security practices, processes, and policies across the IBM Security Services Unit, and served as a regulatory SME and an executive steering committee member for IBM's international banking customer. And before, David, I hand it over to you to talk about your charity, maybe this is the right time to mention the requisite disclaimer.
Yep. Again, thank you for having me as a participant. Always welcome a good conversation. So any opinions that I express today are mine and mine alone and do not represent those of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. So, thanks for having me.
And your charity?
The Bucks County SPCA. So it's no doubt that, there's lots going on and, lots of people have been impacted with COVID and, animals are impacted too. And I definitely have a little bit of a zoo going on at my house. So always partial to animals. So anything it can do to help support, adoption of, rescue and strays is great.
All right, great. Thank you for joining us today, David. And today's topic is cloud security posture. And to give a bit of context on the topic, I'd like to hand it off to Noah Simon, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Axonius. So Noah, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Nate, and thank you, Ashish and David. The majority of organizations have quickly adopted cloud services and moved workloads to providers such as Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and others. And the shared responsibility model of cloud security designates that cloud service providers are responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all the services offered in the cloud. And meanwhile, the customer is responsible for monitoring risky configurations, anomalous user activities, suspicious network traffic, and host vulnerabilities. And cloud service providers rarely suffer security failures that directly affect all of their customers, but customers of these services often don't know how to use them securely, and the services can be very complex to secure themselves. According to the Cloud Security Alliance, some of the top threats seen in major cloud data breaches include 1, misconfiguration and inadequate change control. When services aren't configured properly, that can lead to data loss, data deletion, or modification. 2, inadequate access management. Cloud services need to be adequately protected with multi-factor authentication and the use of strict identity and access controls to limit the use of root and admin accounts. 3rd, account takeover. Attackers are able to take over accounts through typical phishing attacks or through direct compromise of cloud services themselves. 4th, insecure interfaces and APIs. API vulnerabilities can give attackers another path to stealing credentials, and organizations need to employ frequent API testing and protect API keys and avoid API reuse. And lastly, insider threats. Current and former employees, as well as contractors and business partners, can pose risk even if they don't have malicious intentions. When user behavior and activity isn't monitored, it can lead to more misconfigured cloud servers, sensitive data being publicly accessible, and more. And with that overview, back to you, Nate.
All right, thank you, Noah. And now on to the debate. So the format is as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make their opening statements. After opening statements, I will then read 5 questions that each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer. We'll then open the floor to questions from the audience, and then we'll have final remarks. And so I will say again, Anna mentioned it before, feel free to add your questions in either the chat or the question functionality in GoToWebinar. We will have time for them at the end. And so I flipped this coin this morning. And Ashish, you will go first. So you, and I get my timer out here, will have 2 minutes to make your opening remarks on why cloud security posture should be the top priority in cybersecurity starting now.
Thank you for having me, Nate, and I'm really looking forward to a great conversation with David as well. I'm going to start by saying this. There are 3 kinds of organizations that exist at the moment. The first one, which is already in cloud and have been in the space for some time. The second one, who are moving into cloud. And the third one are people who are in the cloud but don't know they already are in the cloud. So I'm going to try and cover all 3 of them in this opening statement. In terms of why people have moved into cloud, I think a lot of mentions have been speed, agility, which makes it quite easy for people to kind of jump in without thinking about whether what the data that they're putting in is the right data, the infrastructure they're using is the right kind of configuration, as Noah mentioned earlier. Now, the importance of cloud security posture is, I think the way I feel about when people start into cloud security or just moving into cloud is you're building a house on a weak foundation, probably not a great start to building a house. It's as simple as that. So if an organization like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud provide you services and gives you cloud native capabilities to maintain a strong foundation to build an empire on their data centers, why not use them? The other part I would also call out is this is another reason for cloud security posture to be important is because it's a swipe card deal, as I like to call it, swipe card cloud. What that basically means is a lot of people have unfortunately been forced to go down the path of I guess starting off cloud by themselves, because security has always said, nah, we can't, like, let's not start with cloud first. But the world's changing, and now it's not a conversation of we're looking at getting into the cloud. The conversation is now we're already in the cloud, whether you know it or not. How do we do, or what can we do to make sure our crown jewels are protected? So I'm going to leave with this. I think I don't want to do the whole 2 minutes. I'm just going to leave by saying this. I'm glad I'm having this conversation in 2020, not in 2012, because 2020 cloud is everyone's conversation. But back when I was doing this 2012, the conversation was more around, what is this cloud thing? Is this like Facebook? So I'm so glad I'm not having this conversation and this debate in 2012, and instead having this 2020. And I feel if you still are not convinced that cloud security posture is not important, imagine this, you're building a house with no windows. That's how I would explain.
All right, great. And David, your time starts now.
Thanks for having me. And again, cloud security posture management is an important factor, but by no means is it, the number one priority in cloud right now. And if you're moving to the cloud or you're in cloud, I would say that's probably number 4 or 5 on my list of priorities. Because when organizations have cybersecurity issues, 80% of the time it goes back to fundamentals. So when you look at the priorities, number 1 is, really understand your business and understand why you're adopting the cloud, because there's going to be changes in business process, changes in technology processes that you need to understand and address. The second part is, assess the skills of your security teams and your dev teams and invest in the proper training for them when it comes to cloud preparation. It's very different taking your typical security personnel and all of a sudden now they have to know infrastructure as code. So I kind of look at that as, cloud security posture management tools are not a substitute for knowledge or accountability. And probably, number 3 is, develop a cloud security strategy. Part of that needs to include mapping your controls that you currently have, mapping to how those controls are impacted or available with what's natively available from the cloud service provider before you take a look at overlaying anything on that. And then really, number 4 is kind of identify the safe type workloads that you can experience and move into cloud so you can actually see how those processes are impacted, whether it's change manager, patch management, or business processes. And then probably number 5, look at the additional tooling that's required. Are there gaps that you identified where you're going to need cloud security posture management to help overlay and close some of those gaps? But by no means do I consider it, priority number 1.
All right. Then here we go. We're going to get into the questions. And remember, each guest will have 2 minutes. And question 1. So as mentioned in the intro, the majority of cloud security issues are due to things like misconfigurations, and overly permissive access rights. So should more responsibility be put on cloud providers to make their services more secure by default? Or is this an area where security teams just need to spend more time? And David, we will start with you starting now.
Thanks. So having been on the security side of a cloud, service provider, I look at it from the point of view that, we were making at the time broad-based commodity services that are consumed by organizations in very different ways. So not all the organizations are consuming those services in the exact same way. And why it's the CSP's job to kind of enhance, what security options are available and enhance controls that are available to the users. It's the user's responsibility to understand what's available, how to configure them, and how to comply with their unique regulatory environment.
All right, and Ashish, you start now.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm so glad David agreed on the cloud security posture when we started the conversation. So I think I'm already winning. But just for the cloud security provider, I do want to call out the fact that I think it's about act of finding a balance. Like, for example, I'm just going to take it out so that everyone else in the audience can understand this as well. When you buy a television these days, which is interconnected, you hope some security responsibilities have been followed by those companies. They make sure your internet is not available. I guess your television is not available on the internet. Same way, when you talk about cloud service providers, there are some responsibilities I find that should innately sit with them. And as security folks, we should be able to obviously guide them on what's missing. So there's obviously I feel there's a balance to be found here, for the simple reason that, say, for example, encryption, which is probably the most simplest example that you can go for any security person would relate to. You probably don't want to have an option where I can have resources or assets which are unencrypted. It should be a default by people to go, this is encrypted by default. You don't even have to think about this. And so to add to the point, they're helping you build that cloud security posture as well. So they also say it's a shared responsibility model. And this is where they rely on us to give them feedback, because they're not, cloud is, for lack of a better word, 6 years old when it's really started being using. So there is still a responsibility on the security teams to go back to these guys and tell them and identify what is not working for us, because clearly the cloud service providers would not have all scenarios thought of, which would be specifically to your organization or could be specific to the kind of workload that you put in the cloud. So it's our responsibility as well to keep up to date, and B, let them know then things should be obvious from their side as well. So I'm concentrating on a balance.
Okay. All right. So on to the second question, so beyond the native cloud security features found on platforms and through the providers, there's no shortage of platforms like cloud access security brokers and cloud workload protection platforms and cloud security posture management platforms. Are these platforms helping, or are they creating even more confusion and complexity? And so this one, we'll start with you, Ashish.
Sure. I think they've, how do I put this nicely is what I'm thinking.
You don't have to be
I
nice,
don't
this
think,
is the debate.
yeah, no, but I think I didn't want to swear. That's what I'm like, where do I think they have definitely created more confusion, and they've made it more complex. So they, on one end, they're doing a great job by letting us know that, hey, obviously clouds are evolving. They're releasing features every day. They're releasing features every week. You obviously can't keep your security teams trained every day on what is important for them when the rest of the technology has kind of moved and started using all these new services that are being available. Like, they're on top of it every day, whereas I feel security folks would always be playing a catch-up game at that rate. So from that perspective, I feel the platform guys have done a great job by taking on some of that responsibility, but at the same time, they've added confusion and complexity as well, because what they've made it is an exercise where it's a benchmark process. As long as you take a benchmark, you're good to go. But if you don't match a benchmark, oh my God, 50,000 errors, and like that, your cloud security posture is wrong, which is, in my opinion, is the wrong way of looking at cloud. And this is probably the only time I'm gonna go with what David said. It's about some of the basic things as well. You want to be able to step back and see from a cloud security posture, what is this really what I want you to do? Am I want to be benchmarking against a CIS? Is that even applicable for myself? And all my workload is serverless? That's where I stand with this.
Okay.
So confusion and complexity without being swearing.
All right, and David, your time starts now.
Now, I think that Ashish has agreed with me. My work for the day is done. But no, seriously, when you look at it from the point of view, I think, cloud security platforms have their place. But like any tooling, I think too often, whether it's CISOs or security teams, technology teams rely too heavily on the tools without a fundamental understanding of either the architecture, the security architecture, or the underlying environment. Most organizations, as they move to cloud, do become multi-cloud. So there is a place for a cloud security platform, just like there's a place for cloud security posture management. But again, it's not a substitute for the fundamental knowledge that you need as you're moving to cloud. It's kind of like a good craftsperson or a good tradesman never blames their tools. So it's kind of like always measure twice and cut once, from that point of view. So I think there is a place for them. But I think, again, you need the fundamental knowledge of the cloud. You need to have appropriately trained people. And this way, then, as you identify what gaps you need to close, then you can look at the tooling. I think, not just from a cloud point of view, but when you look at SIEMs and you look at SOCs and things like that, there's tools for everything. And then all of a sudden you start getting so much noise in the system that people start suppressing alerts, and then bad things happen because you're like, oh, it's just this, oh, it's just that. And then it turns out to be something real. So I think there is a place, but there is no substitute for knowledge and understanding. And especially there's no substitute for accountability on why you made the decision to go to the cloud.
All right. I mentioned every time, this is my favorite question in this series. We do it on every episode. So as a CISO, or if you're advising a CISO, you're given an additional headcount and $1 million to dedicate to cloud security posture, where would you start? So for the in favor candidate, where would you start specifically as it relates to cloud security posture? And for the opposition candidate, what would you prioritize instead? And David, we start with you.
Thanks. So kind of going back to my list, it would be looking at, really, making sure I have a good cloud security strategy that's aligned with the business objectives, making sure I invest in training my people, not just the InfoSec teams, but putting a program into place to train the dev teams on what the expectation is, and really, bring in DevOps, bring in that concept of, because as you move to the cloud, it breaks so many traditional processes, your change management, your patch management, that has to be redone essentially. So really spending time investing in the dev teams, the tech teams, and the security teams to get them up to speed and really hiring in the additional dedicated help that I might need from that point of view.
Okay, Ashish?
Having spoken to a lot of security folks and technology folks at the Cloud Security podcast, I was almost dozing off when David mentioned cloud security strategy, because I feel that's probably one of the reasons why every time we mention this, great idea to start off with, but I feel it's a slow process. Definitely need accountability. So I would probably start by that $1 million being invested in, and I guess in two parts. One is for me to have a cloud security posture manager, so at least have some visibility on what's already there. Second pool would be to kind of spend money on upskilling some of the folks that I have in my security team if they're already not aware of cloud. Third one being, now, okay, I've got that. Now I obviously need to find out what assets that I have and what kind of data that's being floating around. So if I can find a project, or if I can find a project for identifying what kind of assets and what kind of data is being stored in cloud, that's probably where I'll start. And I think these would be the building foundational pieces for a cloud security posture exercise to start off, before you can even say, by the way, you don't have to pay $1 million for a CSPM these days, because there's so many open source. Because if you have a 12 trail, I guess if you have enough skills in the team, you're able to kind of develop your own methodology. That's, I think, a great example of this is Capital One released something called Cloud Custodians, which is an open source solution. And what that allows you to do is just, it allows your team to build their rules for what they think is in the cloud. So start with assets, and then, so CSPM, assets. I think that was the order that I went with.
Okay. Which leads into this next question, which is, I think, another way of getting to the same piece, right? Where the last question, it just assumes $1 million in one headcount could fit into any organization, whatever size. But this, I think, really talks to the prerequisites. So a unified view into all of your cloud assets across all of the providers is really foundational to be able to secure them, right? And so many companies still struggle with being able to easily unify and viewing all of their cloud assets, which leads to ask, if you were dead set on prioritizing cloud security posture, what are the absolute foundational challenges you need to solve to get started? And I'll start with you, Ashish.
Thank you. I'll say getting visibility in terms of what you have there is probably the first one. And as a cheeky plug for Axonius, of course, the question is well framed. I probably would, so the fundamental challenges would be identity. And because in cloud, identity is king. Basically, without identity, you don't have API access, you don't have CLI access. So I will say the foundational challenge is going to be identity, especially if you want to either only exist in cloud versus have your on-premise identity being brought across. That's probably the first foundational challenge. And the second foundational challenge will come across is once you start thinking about, okay, I've got a couple of projects that I think I can move into cloud. Now at that point, you have a couple of choices to either, actually not a couple, like four, I think it's called the 5 R's by Gartner. Basically, either you can rebuild, or you can re-architect, or you can retire. It's probably the hardest one, or you can just do, or simply put, either lift and shift or retransform into for cloud. So that's probably the biggest challenge from a foundational piece. But as I mentioned earlier, before you even go down the path of doing a transformation or lift and shift, cloud already comes with a lot of cloud native services. They're already asking people that these services are free and they improve your posture. So the whole idea behind having a strong foundation to build a house on, that's what people rely on. So no matter which documentation you read from AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, all their well-architected framework talk about this thing where you need to start with the foundational basics of doing the right security practices, of having some kind of an audit enabled for the identity that you bring in, having some kind of a threat management system within, because all cloud service providers these days have a threat management solution. Use some of that to at least make sure that even when you're not using it, and while you're waiting for your cloud cybersecurity strategy to kind of go across the line, at least you have your bases covered and no one's mining Bitcoins in your cloud.
Okay, and David.
So I think the nice thing about this question is, foundational challenges are foundational for all information security. There's your basic building blocks that apply whether you're cloud or whether it's on-prem. I think the biggest issue is cloud kind of amplifies some of the issues with these changes. Because when you look at how most organizations get breached or have issues, it's because of the cyber basics. Something was missed, whether it's a configuration management issue. Configuration management issues just happen faster in the cloud, where usually for your on-prem, you need several bad things to line up at once. For better or worse, in the case of cloud, radio button click could have certain consequences. So when you really look at it, so whether you're talking about configuration management, identity access management, account takeover, APIs, or insider threat, these are things that everybody has, regardless of whether you're in the cloud or not. And most organizations are on a migration pathway to the cloud. They're using a little cloud over here. They still have a lot of operations. And that's why when you look at security strategy and cloud security strategy in general, you have to really look at how does this all integrate? Because there are very few organizations that are pure cloud-based organizations or operations. So you just have to look at the foundational changes and look at how does that change. And if you're in business, you have insiders, but maybe now if you're a cloud, you have to worry about, okay, so what are the cloud privileged users doing that are work for the CSP? So similar to if you had a third-party service provider. So I think it's just re-examining the basic fundamentals through a different lens to make sure that you don't create any additional gaps.
Right, and that segues nicely to the last question here. So the title of the session was, should cloud security posture be the #1 priority right now? But I think you'd both agree that the answer needs to be a little bit more nuanced than that. So the final question here is, what kinds of organizations should prioritize cloud security posture right now? And conversely, what types of organizations or security teams should focus on other things? So David, we start with you.
Sure. So I think one of the key things, when you go back to earlier, as Ashish mentioned, how mature are you in the cloud? So part of that is, organizations, a lot of them are operating in the cloud to some extent. So part of that is, once you understand your cloud, maturity, that kind of dictates to what you need to prioritize from a security point of view. So really looking at it and then going back to the fundamentals that we're talking about. Are you good at asset management? Are you good at identity and access management? APIs, again, you could have a very strong cloud posture. You could have a good on-prem posture, but if you don't test your APIs and you use a corrupt API, I can probably still get as an attacker, what I need to get from your systems. So really, I'd say the biggest factor is, focus on the fundamentals, look at the relative maturity of your organization as you go to the cloud, and also consider your industry. If you're in a highly regulated industry, you need to look at how do you meet your regulatory requirements from that point of view. Because again, you can outsource anything, but you can never outsource accountability.
All right. And Ashish, your time starts now.
Thank you. So I would put this in two buckets, to simply put. For an organization which is aware that they're in the cloud, I would probably start at that point from a cloud security posture perspective. I think David's mentioned some really interesting points. I'll definitely look into those. But the way I look at this for an organization, if you're regulated, yes, 100% cloud security posture would be the good, but I would still start with asset management first and then look at cloud security posture as well, because it's 9 out of 10 times you're already in cloud, you just don't know it. But I think the advantage you would have as an enterprise or as a regulated entity is that, say, cloud service providers would give you extra attention for making sure all your data is collected in one place. So I'll probably start by consolidating them if you're already not doing it, but they should probably focus on, other things while having a cloud security posture being managed. The other one is to David's point, for organizations which are not mature, they should start with the right foundational pieces so that they can make sure that they can focus on other things. So use cloud native services to build the foundation, then focus on the other things. Say, for example, if you're a startup or if you're a small, medium-sized business, tick the boxes which are basic foundational pieces, and they're not big projects. They're just tick boxes in cloud service providers, and then focus on other things while you build your empire. Whereas the first lot is for folks who already have an empire or a regulated entity, or you have massive organizations. You probably should focus on cloud security posture already.
All right, so what we're gonna do now is we will move to the final remarks, and then right after that, we're gonna poll the audience again, and then we will read your questions. So we now are at the final remarks, and we will start with you, David.
Again, thanks for having me, and I always welcome a good discussion. So again, cloud security posture management, it's important. It shouldn't be the first thing as you go to cloud. Again, you really need to have it as part of your holistic toolbox. But really, look at your foundational challenges, make sure you can address it as you move to cloud. And cloud security strategies, as Ashish mentioned, does take time, but it's not an excuse to avoid doing it. So, I'd make sure that you're doing that, address your foundational changes, and look to see how moving to the cloud overall changes, processes and governance for your organization, and start really addressing those. And again, cloud security posture management is important, but again, it's number 4 or 5 on my list. So thank you so much.
All right. And your final remarks, Ashish.
Cool. I think I've already won because David agreed with me. But I'm just going to start by saying the cloud security posture is 100% the top priority. And I think that the reason I say this is this. I feel like a lot of us feel we know cloud. A lot of us feel we're at pace with cloud. A lot of us feel that tools can solve the problem as well. Cloud security posture, I would not just say cloud security posture management. Cloud security posture by itself is important because I feel it's such a basic foundational thing for just jumping into the cloud. I think we need to stop thinking about cloud just as another on-prem service that we're trying to protect. I think that's where the difference is coming in. When you move into the cloud, you kind of need to understand there are different sets of rules that you're working with, not the same kind of rules that on-premise have. When you go into an on-premise world, if you have access to one computer, you have access to all the computers. That's not the same in cloud. So if something as foundational as that is different, you can imagine how all the other aspects of cybersecurity are different as well. So what my final remark is this: you should have cloud security as your first priority for simple reason that it's a different game, different players, different landscape. So new rules, new games. That's what I'm trying. I hope I said that correctly. I was trying to say new rules, new games, but you get the point.
All right. Excellent. So thanks. So we're going to now poll the audience one more time to see if our guests changed your thinking about the topic. And then while you're answering this, another thing, just we have time for questions, so be sure to ask them within the question or chat functionality here, and we will get to your questions.
And as a reminder, the first time we polled the audience, 38% were in favor and 63% were opposed.
Wow.
So now we're at 50-50.
I'm glad I could convince some people. Thank you, folks. My job here is done.
All right, so let's open it up for questions.
All right, thank you, Ashish, and thank you, David. We had a few questions come in, and feel free to add others. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So the first question that came in was, how do you go about upskilling and training employees? What are the top skills or certifications that you would recommend for strengthening cloud security across the people who own cloud security?
So do you want me to go first on that one, or?
Yeah, no, you go first, David.
Okay, sure. So really looking at it from the perspective of looking at the security teams, understanding what they need to learn, because all of a sudden, if you're a traditional infrastructure security person, now all of a sudden you need to learn like JSON, you need to learn Perl, you need to learn things that are traditionally not in the wheelhouse of an infrastructure security person. And then looking at from a dev point of view, what do you need to learn from an infrastructure as code perspective? And then really looking at it from a DevOps point of view, start looking at how do you train the developers, not to be secure coding experts, because again, developers generally tend to be like artists when it comes to code, which can be good or bad, but it's kind of looking at, so how do you get them the right training for DevOps? How do you get the right tool chains involved? And how do you kind of put up guardrails to help them, to give them the flexibility to code what they need to, but also adhere to the corporation's parameters of what's acceptable. So I'd start along those lines and then really look at how do you kind of build a system of monitoring the dev teams from a point of view of looking at if they're coding certain types of errors, whether it's cross-site scripting, cross-site reflection, to see, do they need some more upskilling in certain areas. But I generally tend to train all the dev teams to a certain level, try to train the dev leader to a higher level. And then for more esoteric stuff, that kind of goes to the security team to help with resolution. But this way, if you can get the dev teams and the dev team leader involved, it makes a big difference. Because if you're addressing 70% of the issues, you're 70% safer.
Okay, Ashish, do you want to add to that?
Yep, I definitely want to add to that. I think I'll probably take a different approach to this. And plus, possibly also because I run the Cloud Security Academy, I have a different view on this. And I feel everyone has different strengths, and people should focus on that. But what they should start off with is taking a step back, because the foundational pieces of security can be applied on cloud. It's just a different way of applying it. So if you already have some existing security knowledge, I would probably step back and go, okay, what are my big pockets that I already know from my experience in on-premise, whether it's vulnerability management or whether it's identity access management, whatever those pieces may be. I'll probably start by mapping those on how that looks in cloud. And because I think, it helps you learn from something that you already have knowledge of. So you're just basically mapping how it is in on-prem, or how it was in on-prem, and how it is in cloud. So that's a good place to start. The other one would be, if you are someone who is probably technical or more of an architect, you probably have two kind of paths to go with. And I feel like cloud allows you to be both. So you don't have to be technical always, but you do need to know cloud services. So I would probably, once I've finished going, okay, I've mapped all my controls, or if I'm starting off new completely, I'll probably would go with something like a foundational course. I'm not going to plug my own course here. I'm sure there are other out there, but I know I'm the only one who's doing this in the world at the moment. So I go for something foundational, which goes across different areas of security in the cloud. And then you go into, say, deep dive into AWS, Azure, Google. So because when you go into those training, when you go into an AWS training or Azure training or a Google Cloud training, what they're teaching you is how to do security in AWS, or how to do security in Azure, or how to do security in GCP. Just great, but it creates a bias for you thinking security from their perspective, but may not work for your organization. So foundational first, then deep dive into cloud.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a good segue into the next question that came in, which is, how should a team with few resources go about securing cloud assets across multiple providers? So what tools or processes can help automate as much as possible? And Ashish, it sounds like you hit on some of that. If you want to elaborate, that would be good. Yeah,
perfect. So I probably would start with looking at the current skill set of the team. And I totally understand, like, unfortunately, all of us security folks don't have all the resources in the world and all the money in the world, because we're just a cost center helping the company manage risk. So if you have a small team, I would probably start with the obvious skill sets. If you have someone who's a developer or has that software development mindset in the team, I would probably get them to look at something like a cloud custodian if you're an AWS. But if you're looking for something which is more multi-cloud, I would start with, and I guess almost like an inventory system first. The amount of conversations that I've had with people where they don't know what exists in cloud, it always bothers me that people still maintain it in an Excel sheet. We're in 2021 and using cloud as an Excel sheet when it says APIs to pull on what's your current asset state. So if you have skill set in your team to go with that, I would probably start there. If you don't, then there are obviously, as I said earlier, when the $1 million question, not every cloud security posture manager tool out there is $1 million. Although there are some which I feel is ridiculous for this, considering I feel CSPM space is also transforming. It's slowly going away. It's transforming into anyway. That's a debate for another topic. But what I would look at is some of the open source options, or some of the cheaper options for cloud security posture manager, if you don't have anyone in the team who's already aware of cloud, because what that would do is at least give you a basic understanding of what should be done as per AWS, or what should be done as per Azure, or what should be done as per multi-cloud. So then you can go peel a layer and say, okay, this is what AWS says, but I should probably only look at these three components because that's what's more important for my organization.
Yeah, and I would look at that. I'd add to it from the point of view of there's a lot of good, free, basic fundamental training that are out there from the different big cloud service providers. They can give you good basic architecture, basic skills and understanding from that aspect of it. And then I would kind of, get back to the basics, look at, things like identity and access management. How does it change as I move to the cloud? Because the biggest thing is you want to make sure it federates across the different clouds that you're using. You want to make sure, so really it's a combination of looking at the fundamentals of your InfoSec program and essentially diagnosing what's going to potentially change as you move to the cloud. How do you handle patch management? How do you handle change management? Because odds are you have the fundamentals there for your on-prem. So now it's looking at make sure that, okay, how does this change or how does it get nuanced as you go to your off-prem cloud? As organizations struggle with a lot of the same things, regardless of whether they're in the cloud or on-prem. Identity access management, asset inventory. Those are things that organizations, even DLP, that organizations struggle with all the time, yet those are technologies that have been around for a very long time. So it's kind of, that's why I'm a big proponent of look at the basics, look at how it changes as you move to the cloud, so you're at least getting a solid foundation. And then start look at, what additional tooling might you need to invest in later. The cloud security native controls have improved significantly over the past 8 years where I've been involved in cloud. And new options and new controls come out pretty much every 6 months. So it's kind of, reevaluating that and looking at, kind of tiering your workloads. You don't want to have the most sensitive, highest regulated workload being your first thing that you go to the cloud with. So really looking at, what's safe to go to the cloud and get you the learning experience that isn't going to create, potential harm to your organization. But this way you can start getting experience of how do processes change? How does identity federate? Things like that.
Sorry, can I add something there? I just want to add something just from a perspective. Definitely there are fundamentals training from AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, but if you have a small team, I would urge them to go through the training, but go through the training with the lens in mind that this is how AWS wants you to learn security, or this is how Azure wants you to learn security. So still have that at the back of your head, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you still need to have your own fundamentals covered, to David's point as well. But go through the training, but just have that at the back of your mind, because this is how they want you to learn security, because they would have it in a way that suits their product, not how it suits your organization.
Excellent. Thank you both. And I think we have time for just this one last question. Are there any tools that detect drift rather than only look for vulnerable configurations? So if there are any tools, whether native within cloud platforms or other dedicated cloud platform tools?
Cool. David, you want to go first? You
Sure.
seem like eager.
So there definitely are. So part of it looks at, depending upon, what kind of container strategy are you adopting? How are you using microservices? There's a nice thing about that, cloud security done right, you can actually detect drift. So this way you can come up with a configuration that's been, misconfigured. So it almost depends upon, what cloud, service provider are you using, but it's done slightly differently in each cloud. It's done differently if you're using Kubernetes, if you're using Docker or things like that. But so part of that is outlining, what services are you availing yourself of as an organization. But then you can definitely put the means in there to detect, like, if you have a misconfigured bucket, those are things that you can detect. So, part of it is looking at, what services are you using from that, cloud provider, and then look at, what's the native capabilities to do that detection. And then you can get involved in, more esoteric things later, as far as like, using things like Lambda or other things like that to automatically take down misconfigurations when they're spotted.
Cool. I'm a big component. I'm sorry. Are you done? I think he's done. I'm a good component of free. So I would say there's an open source tool called Bridgecrew. Those guys are doing a great job in doing multi-cloud drift management, for lack of a better word. The way it works is it syncs in with your source control, whether it's GitHub. I believe they only have GitHub integration at the moment, but there are tools that exist outside of the cloud service provider, which are free and allows you to track drift. Bridgecrew is one. Even within cloud providers, I think these days, Amazon has an example where you're able to, if you're using CloudFormation templates, so if you're using a template or configuration system from the cloud provider, they actually have those drift components in there as well. Yeah, so those are the two examples that I'll probably start with.
Yeah, and I won't name any products, but I know that there's something that will look at many of the different cloud providers and allow you to see anytime anything changes, and then you can automatically decide what actions to take anytime something changes, but I'm not going to name anything whatsoever.
I'm just gonna point at it.
All right, thank you both. Those are all the questions we have for today.
All right. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Nate. And that concludes our 7th debate. Would like to thank both Ashish and David for participating today. We'll be sending a link to the recording, and be sure to join us for the next episode of the Great Debate on November 17th, where Dan Greenhouse of SX Training and Craig Taylor of CyberHoot will debate whether endpoint protection should be the top cybersecurity priority right now. This series is sponsored by Axonius, the cybersecurity asset management company that gives customers a comprehensive asset inventory, uncovers security gaps, and automatically validates and enforces policies. To try Axonius free for 30 days or to get a demo, go to axonius.com. Finally, we're excited to be making a donation to the Girls Who Code on behalf of Ashish Rajan, and a donation to Bucks County SPCA on behalf of David Cass. Thank you all for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Great conversation.